this evening, we'll start with a musical performance from Corin of the musical group Boy to the World. And then following the performance, Ronald King, president of the synagogue, will deliver a talk entitled, "Excuse Me, Are You Jewish?" And then our second presentation will be with Rabbi Prince from the synagogue, who will speak about when you can't or shouldn't forgive. And we will have a Q&A with our two speakers following the presentations. So if you have any questions on Zoom, you can send them to our host, Sarah Dodge, in the chat. And if anyone in our audience has questions, you can raise your hand after the presentations. And then we will end the evening with another performance featuring Corin and Warren from Boy to the World. We do have some delicious treats and tea and coffee, so please help yourself. And they are courtesy of Wannabagel and Ajax. I will also put up a display of some of our library books, and there's some books from the synagogue as well. So I would encourage you to browse after the program. We also have a display in our lobby for Jewish Heritage Month with some items that were contributed by the synagogue, as well as a display in the library. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Corin to begin her performance. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So my name is Corin Kassir. I'm 1/3 of the music group Boy to the World. Unfortunately, due to COVID, my band member Roz is not able to be here, and Warren will be coming later. So you just got me for the beginning. I'm going to start with a traditional Jewish song called Hine Ma Tov. And the words in English mean how good and sweet it is when brothers and sisters are together in harmony. Sorry, I already tuned, but something's in a tune. I apologize. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבטחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבטחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבטחים גם יחד. טוב ומה נעים, שבטחים גם יחד. הנה מה 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 טוב, הנה מה טוב, לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב, לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבטחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבטחים גם יחד. But I'm going to tell you a story while I'm tuning about the next song. So when we celebrate the Sabbath, we start the Sabbath by lighting the candles, and then we end the Sabbath with a candle ritual as well. And so the final service is called Havdalah, which means separation. It's how we separate the holy day from the rest of the week. And there are three symbols. One is a braided candle. One is wine, and one is spices. So this song is actually the song, Sephardic song, Sephardic tradition. And it talks about those three symbols, the wine, the spices, and the candle. Sorry, I found this string that was out of tune. So I'm trying to multitask, but it's hard. There we go. Okay, I think that should do it. So this song is about those symbols. It's called Laner Ulib Samim, and it's a Sephardic tune. Laner Ulib Samim, Nafshi me'achela. Laner Ulib Samim, Nafshi me'achela. Itinu li kol shel le'havdala. 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 This part is a la la part. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Im titnu li kos shel yayin le'havdala. Im titnu li kos shel yayin le'havdala. Im titnu li kos shel yayin le'havdala. Itinu li kos shel yayin le'havdala. 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 Okay, so the last song I'm going to do before Ron's presentation is called Hafinjan, and it's a song about a traditional Middle Eastern coffee maker that you put on the fire, and it's about the experience of sitting around the fire and the coffee percolating and the wind blowing, and there's also an audience participation. There's some clapping. So I'm gonna knock on my guitar, and that's your cue to do two claps. So it sort of goes na 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 na. Okay, so it's two quick claps. So הרוח נושבת נירה, נוסיף רחסן למדורה, לחפיס רחת הגמן, והאש מהלב כתומן, האש מהחבת שירה מלמדת, סובב לא סובב לפינג'ן. לה 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 לה, סובב לא סובב לפינג'ן. La 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 la, סובב לא סובב לפינג'ן. הרוח נושבת נירה, נוסיף בקיסם למדורה, ורק נזרועות הימן, האש יעלה כקורבן, האש מהקמת שירה מלהבת, סובב לא סובב לפינג'ן. La 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 la, סובב לא סובב לפינג'ן. La 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 la, סובב לא סובב לא
Thank you, Corin, so much for your performance, and I love to hear some voices singing along as well. So our first speaker for tonight is Ronald King, and it has been his privilege to serve as president of the B'Nai Shalom V'Tikvah congregation for the past 3 years. He became a member of the synagogue 26 years ago when the congregation was founded. As a teacher in Durham Public Schools since 1972 and a resident since 1976, he was overjoyed to be a founding member of a Reformed Jewish congregation. The congregation is grateful to St. Paul's United Church in Ajax for their ongoing interfaith relationship, allowing their congregation to rent worship space. May the relationship with St. Paul's and many other faith groups in Durham region be a continued source of respect, understanding, and service in the community. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Ron to begin his presentation.
Talk about a hard act to follow. One thing you need to know about Corin, she's a musician, she's a Hebrew school teacher, she tutors bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, she officiates at weddings. Boy, I'll tell you, multitasking, that's what this girl does. I kind of got myself stuck here when I talked to Julia, and I said, I wonder if these people that are coming who are not Jewish really know what Jewish is about. So Julia said, why don't you tell them? So, the first thing you want to do? You go to a resource. This is a very good book. What is a Jew? I started reading and I thought, boy, I'm never in 15 minutes am I going to tell them all that's in this book. It's just not going to happen. I'm a good speed reader, but no. So what I've done is I've invented, I call it the 5 W's for understanding Jewish. Okay? So being an auditory learner, I'm speaking to you without any visuals. However, I do have a handout. If you want to know what the 5 W's are later, you can just pick it up over there. They're there for you. So here we go. The 5 W's of Jewish. Number 1, what is Jewish? Biblical Judaism. That's our Torah, first 5 books of our Bible. The Jewish Bible is called, in the Jewish circles, the Tanakh. It's our foundation. It's where our mitzvot, our laws, our path, our rules or guide, moral guide comes from. But there's rabbinical Judaism, because the Torah was written, but you want to understand what's written. Fortunately for Jews, we have rabbis who study Torah and then explain it to us, the nuances. They put down all that study in a book called the Talmud. So we have Torah, Tanakh, Rabbinical Judaism, Talmud, all this commentary about what's written. Then we have prophetic Judaism, because along came these people who said, God is speaking to me. This is what the Jews should be doing. Social action. Prayers are not enough. You have to act on the prayers. And if you're not doing it properly, the prophets will tell you that. Israel. That's what Jewish is, Israel. The homeland of the Jews. The miracle. I'm older than Israel. I'm turning 75 in June. Israel's 1 year younger than I am. A miracle created modern Israel, but there's also ancient Israel. And if you go to Israel, you just have to dig up your lawn and you'll find all kinds of artifacts going back centuries. That's what Israelis do. They go and find things all about their history, but they also are a living, vibrant community. And finally, there's secular Jew. What is Jewish? Secular customs, eats, things that, I get that joke. That's a Jewish joke. Yes, that's what Jewish is. Why Jewish? See, second W. Ethical. We have the teachings of Judaism. They give you a path to follow. This is how you should lead your life. Lineage. Lineage. You inherit Judaism from your mother. No, you inherit the Jewish people from your mother. At least that's what our Torah tells us. Marriage. You're not Jewish, but you want to create a Jewish home. I'm going to convert to Judaism, a Jew by choice. Israel. I'm a refugee. I seek refuge. The law of return says, if you can, according to the chief rabbinate, prove that you're Jewish, you're a citizen of Israel. Secular. You're drawn to the writings or accomplishments of Jewish people. Fascinating. People talk about the contributions of Jewish people in all different walks of life. When is Jewish? Shabbat, or the Sabbath, the separation. Holy day separated from the work week. Jewish contribution to Western civilization, the weekend. The separation, though, is in Judaism a holy time. Life cycle events, that's when Jewish is. Circumcision for a male or a naming ceremony for a female. Bar and bat mitzvah. A wedding, a Jewish wedding with the chuppah, symbolizing the household. And you stand under the chuppah when you get married. Or burial. There's a certain customs that are followed, not only for the person being buried, but for the relatives of the person that's deceased. High holy days, that's when Jewish is. There's Rosh Hashanah, the head of the new year, and Yom Kippur that follows 10 days later, the Day of Atonement. Time for self-reflection, time for fasting and thinking about that which makes you. There's Sukkot, which follows shortly after Yom Kippur, which is a Thanksgiving. You build a hut, a sukkah, you sit outside and think about how fortunate, how many gifts God has given us. Simchat Torah, which follows shortly after Sukkot, at the end of Sukkot. The joy of Torah, celebrating it because we start reading Torah all over again. Each year you go through the parashah, the readings, and the cycle continues. But it never gets boring because there's so much to learn. Hanukkah or Passover, historical events. Hanukkah, the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem. The Pesach, the leaving of the land of Egypt. And finally, when is Jewish? Yom HaShoah, the memorial to victims of the Holocaust and a pledge to confront racism. Where is Jewish? Israel. A huge percentage of the Jewish people live there. Also, a huge percentage live in North America, particularly the United States. Formerly in Eastern Europe, it's not Jewish that much anymore. The Jewish culture was exterminated in World War II. Approximately 40% of the Jewish people disappeared. If you think about it, think about Hamilton to Oshawa, gone. Everybody, man, woman, and child. Yemen, Ethiopia, Iran, Iraq, North Africa. All those were once large Jewish centers, no longer. Some have been transported to Israel. Some have left on their own accord. But racism has driven all of them away from their homeland. And now I come to one that's particularly personal. Russia or the Soviet Union. I'll take you back to 1970s when this guy was teaching Hebrew school at Holy Boston Temple in Toronto. Knock on the door. I say to my grade 7 class, just a minute. I walk over and open the door. The man is standing there. He's about this tall, and he has a letter in his hand. And I recognize that letter. I wrote it along with a few others to his family. Why? Because he had a J on his Soviet identification. He was one, J stands for Jewish. He was one of the refuseniks. They were people who said, I want to leave the Soviet Union and go to Israel. When they started to do that, a lot of bad things happened. This is a picture of Anatoly Sharon, one of the first refuseniks who went on trial, of course ended up in prison as a result. Yes. Anatoly got my letters, and the Russian authorities let him go to Israel. About a year later, they let his 2 daughters and his wife go to Israel, and they settled in Boston. I remember his name only because he had the same name, first name as Anatoly Sharon. We hugged, and the tears came forth, and the kids were staring at what in the world is happening. That's where Jewish is. And of course, elsewhere, there are small communities of Jews. France has a large Jewish community, England, other places in South America, South Africa. Here's a book that I got in the mail from our library, PJ Library, that says, Gina from Siberia. Gina is the dog. Here's what it says inside. In the Soviet Union, life for Jewish people was very difficult. Many hesitated to practice their religion or celebrate holidays. Employers often refused to promote Jewish workers. So it goes, and they left. Many Jews decided that they were going to smuggle in Hebrew books and Torahs and so on, because the people who knew they were Jewish didn't know what Judaism was, what the Jewish people were. And so many of us tried to help the refuseniks. And the good news is we were shouting, let my people go, which came from Exodus when the Jews left Egypt. And lo and behold, many of them thankfully did go and were allowed to go. I close off with who is Jewish? The Torah, or Talmud, says only those born of a Jewish mother. Reform Judaism, I'm a member of Reform Judaism. On March 1983, at a rabbinical conference, said, a child born to a Jewish mother or a Jewish father. So established a different law according to those Reform rabbis in the United States, not the Reform rabbis in Canada. It depends on the gatekeeper, really, But tradition tells us one thing, and then people have to make up their mind. And Israel has to make up its mind. And its rabbi will recognize those people who are born of a Jewish mother or have converted to Hebrews. The Nazis, if you read this book, The Betrayal of Anne Frank, here's what the Nazis said about who's Jewish. if you are 1/4 Jewish, that means if you have a grandparent who is Jewish, you're considered Jewish. However, you're still allowed to be a German citizen. If you are 1/2 Jewish or 3/4 Jewish, you're not allowed to be a German citizen. You were Jewish. So they had it all figured out. The Soviets had a stamp on your card, identification card with a J. That was your nationality. And as I said earlier, the chief rabbinate also has rules to follow, the chief rabbinate of Israel. In the book that I spoke about earlier, it said there is an ethnic definition. A Jew, therefore, is a member of people by birth or conversion who chooses to share a common cultural heritage, a religious perspective, a spiritual horizon derived uniquely from a Jewish experience and Jewish wisdom. The author also comments this definition is probably going the way of the dinosaur. And it's pretty difficult to understand anyways. So, I hope I've achieved my purpose, which is to say, who knows? Are you Jewish? Probably you haven't met Judaism before. You haven't met Jewish before. So I thank you for coming today to meet Jewish. And I hope that maybe sometime in the future you'll pick up a book or two and read and learn more about it. And thank you for your attention this evening.
Thank you so much, Ron, for sharing your knowledge with us. Our next speaker is Rabbi Prince, who was born in Bucharest, Romania. Her family moved to Israel when she was a toddler, where she grew up a proudly secular Jew. The family moved to Belleville in 1986, and Rabbi Prince graduated from Belleville Collegiate Institute before attending the University of Waterloo for a bachelor's degree in mathematics and Western University for a Bachelor of Education. She taught high school math and physics for several years and earned a master's degree in science curriculum development at the same time. While living in Vancouver, she became curious about her heritage and deeply involved in Jewish life. She eventually enrolled in rabbinical studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York as the recipient of the prestigious Crown Fellowship. She was ordained in May 2005. Rabbi Prince is the spiritual leader of B'Nai Shalom V'Tikvah, Durham's only Reform synagogue. She is also working on her doctorate in higher education policy at OISE at the University of Toronto, where her research revolves around the factors that affect whether and how faculty members support students with mental ill health in their classes. We are very fortunate to have her with us this evening. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Rabbi Prince to begin her presentation.
The hazard of being a rabbi, according to my parents, is that you get used to the fact that you get to speak and nobody gets to interrupt you. And so I'm just going to have my timekeeper here because unlike Ron, I can't keep things to 15 minutes. So the topic that I have for you today, I could do 2 to 3 hours on, and so I'm going to try and keep it a little bit more concise and then leave you some time for questions. So I also want to thank you very much for coming out in person to come in here and learn from us, from our community. Can I just see a show of hands? How many of you have been to a Jewish event before, like a synagogue or oh, good. All right. And the other thing I want to know from you is, so the topic that I'm going to be talking about has to do with forgiveness. And so I'm going to do a quick poll. How many here think that it is a really good thing to forgive people? Okay. How many of you think that it is like you owe people forgiveness if they've asked you and they really meant it. Like if people did something wrong, they really meant it when they asked you for forgiveness. And if they do that, you feel that you owe them forgiveness. Fewer people. Excellent. All right. So, are you? I think if you just do a regular, I don't need the speaking. Like I don't need the speaker notes. Yeah? Okay, so next slide. Okay, so it's a bit of a provocative title, and I did that on purpose because I feel that we live in a community, we live in a culture, especially in North America, where you are not only expected to forgive people, but you are pressured to forgive people. And Judaism this pressure, I think, is very much, it comes from a Christian point of view. So the Christianity is very famous about forgiving people, about turning the other cheek, about moving on. And I wanted to show a topic where Judaism, even though we have the same values, a lot of the same values as the Christian religion, we have a slightly different approach than what people know. And I wanted to discuss that. So there we go. All right, so the seminal text. So sorry, let me backtrack. As Ron had mentioned, we are pretty much rabbinic Jews these days. In other words, we're no longer just following what's in the Bible. We have a very rich tradition of 2 millennia of texts and commentaries on texts and discussions and understandings and debates. And all of that is something that we take into the soup of what is Judaism and what it is that we observe and what it is that we follow. Maimonides is one of the sort of like big league, right? Like major league, one of our major league commentators. He lived in the Middle Ages. He lived in Morocco mostly, but also Spain. And he codified a lot of the information that was in the Talmud and in other books. There were commentaries and debates about issues. So this is what's considered the seminal text on forgiveness in Judaism. And he wrote, this is how you're supposed to do forgiveness. If the offender has made restitution, has asked and begged for forgiveness once, even twice, and if the offended person knows that the other has done true teshuvah, we'll talk about what those words mean in a second, true teshuvah, and feels remorse for what was done, then the offended person should offer the sinner mechila, which is a form of forgiveness. He is prohibited from being cruel in not offering this mechila, for this is not the way of the seed of Israel. So often when I talk to Jewish people, they say to me, but Judaism requires you to forgive. We have this text that says you must forgive if all of these things happen. And if you don't forgive, that's not okay because you're being cruel in a way that is not appropriate to Jewish people. All right. So before we can actually really dig into this whole like forgiveness versus non-forgiveness, we have to understand some terms and what the different terms are. Wait, don't rush me. I have things to say. All right. So the main category that we need to talk about is the difference between repentance and teshuvah. So if you were to look at any Jewish book and it says teshuvah, it'll automatically translate it as repentance, but they're not the same thing. So in other words, in our culture, in our secular, slightly influenced by Christianity culture, repentance is the key factor in whether or not you should forgive a person, right? Do they really, truly, sincerely regret what they've done? Now you can go to the next. There we go. So from the Oxford Dictionary, repentance is one thing. It is a sincere regret or remorse for something that you've done that was not a good thing to do, that you've hurt someone or have done something that was unethical. Repentance means to sincerely regret your action and show remorse. Teshuvah is not the same thing. One more. There we go. The word teshuvah in Hebrew, which is often translated as repentance, actually means a whole lot more. Teshuvah means a return. It has every word in Hebrew has a root system. This particular root is from the word to return. So it can mean to turn around. It can mean to return home. It can mean to return to a path. It's much more subtle than what repentance is. Next one. Okay. And the other piece that we need to sort of have on our smorgasbord before we dive into the forgiveness is the whole concept of a sin. So a sin in, again, general secular society and in, like, that's been influenced by Christianity, when you're talking about a sin, you're talking about a bad act. You're talking about something that is deeply immoral or deeply painful or deeply hurtful. In Judaism, the word sin is chet, and the word chet literally means missing the mark. That's why I've got I put them in the wrong order for the transitions, but that's why I have the archery thing here. Because in Judaism, there's no specific measure of how big a sin is or how small a sin is. There's discussion about that in the Talmud for sure, and there's lots of things that we can talk about. But when you're talking about sort of like the general notion of sin, in Judaism, it means that you've missed the mark. So when you did something wrong, you missed the mark, you took aim and you fired and it didn't hit the target. And then when you do teshuvah, which is the way that you repair the world from the sin that you've done, from the chet that you've done, what you have to do is a return. It's a re-aim. So you still have the target. It's still right there. You know where it is. And instead of like doing this and missing it, you're going to correct your aim and you're going to shoot again, and it's going to hit the mark, and it's not going to be a sin, and it's going to be a return to the proper path, to the proper place that you need to be, right? So you can see that it's a subtle difference between just repentance and what Judaism asks us to do. All right, so what is it if it's not just repentance? One, a return to the correct path. Right? That's what I was saying. You re-aim and you're correcting your path. So in fact, you begin your teshuvah, you begin the way of righting the wrong just by the fact that you are re-aiming, that you took stock of what it is that you've done, and you are now re-aiming your arrow in a proper direction. So a return to what? What is this right path that we are returning to? We are returning to a whole relationship with God and with oneself. And I want to be very clear about this. Notice that that is something that happens as part of teshuvah. It's part of the work that you do as teshuvah, regardless of whether you hurt other people or you did something that was just hurtful for your life, or it was something that maybe was like religiously not okay. It doesn't matter what you missed. It doesn't matter which action caused this rupture in the path and in the relationship between you and the divine. That is part of the process. Next. Okay. And this process of noting what it is that you've done, seeing that you've missed the aim, re-aiming, re-firing, going back to the right path, that isn't important for Judaism. That's an important path of the structure of God's creation. God created us capable of making choices. And that means giving us the tools to make better choices. So this is all part of a very essential part of the structure of God's creation. Okay, so the bottom line is this. The offender, whoever did something wrong, and I use the word offender, which can be, I don't want people to think that I mean like only small offenses. I just couldn't figure out a way of naming a person. It can be as horrible as you can imagine, and it can be as small as making fun of someone behind their back, right? So whoever this offender is, whoever did something wrong, that person is obligated to do this teshuvah. He or she are obligated to correct their aim and repair their relationship to the divine and their place in the world. And the person they hurt is obligated to permit the process of teshuvah to take place. God created this system. It's a dual system, right? So if you hurt someone, you owe them. We'll talk in a minute about what that means, but you owe them a correction. if you were hurt, what you are obligated to do is to permit that person to undergo this process of righting their aim and re-aiming and refiring and making that relationship with God, work again. So that's it. I had 45 minutes, 5 minutes in. Forgiveness is the religious duty. We're all done, yes? Obviously not. Not so fast. Going back to Maimonides. So let's look at this a little bit more in detail. And again, what I'm doing now is what rabbis have done for millennia, right? Like we take a text and we pull it apart and we analyze it piece by piece and we come up with things that probably Maimonides never intended, but that's okay. And then when I write the commentary on Maimonides, 100 years from now, if I'm lucky, somebody else is going to look at my commentary and go, oh, I wonder what she meant, and pull apart all my stuff. That's the way that Judaism works. So I want to highlight all the ifs, right? If the offender made the restitution, if they asked for and begged for forgiveness, if you know that they truly mean it, that it's not just lip service, if you know all of this, if you know they're remorseful, then we have to offer the sinner mechila. Mechila is a form of forgiveness. I'll talk about the different forms of forgiveness in a minute, but I want you to see that even though this seems to say that you are obligated to forgive people, that's not actually what it says. It says if a person comes to you and does all the things that they should do, if you know that whoever hurt you meaningfully wants to repair their relationship in the world with God and with themselves and with you, then you have to offer this one kind of type of, I'm hesitant to even call it forgiveness because it's not actually forgiveness. It actually sort of more equivalent to a pardon. But if a person doesn't ask you for forgiveness, you don't owe them anything. It doesn't say here anything about owing someone forgiveness or a relationship or a renewed relationship. You don't have to be part of a relationship that is painful or that hurts you. You don't have to be to open yourself up to being re-traumatized, right? The key in Judaism in general is moderation. It's always the middle. Whenever you ask a question, there's going to be one extreme and the other extreme. If you're not sure what Judaism has to say, it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. And what that is in this particular case is that, like in more modern psychological terms, I guess, I would say that you owe yourself safety and you owe yourself to take care of your own emotional needs first. So we'll talk now about what this teshuvah and mechila mean. Next one. All right. So full teshuvah, this is also for Maimonides. Full teshuvah requires 6 steps. If you miss any one of them, it's like you haven't done any of it, right? You owe the entire 6 steps. First one, feeling sincere regret. If you don't feel sincere regret, everything else doesn't matter. If you're only asking for forgiveness because you want to get something out of it, if you only want to ask for forgiveness because someone else told you you should ask for forgiveness and pushed you, it's meaningless. Teshuvah cannot happen. This return to the correct path, this return to your relationship with God, this return to the proper alignment within yourself cannot happen if that first step is not there. You have to feel sincere regret. 2, you have to make a public confession of wrongdoing, which is sort of like the hardest thing you can imagine. Now, if somebody knows that you've done something to them, a public confession is having a conversation with them and acknowledging the wrong that you've done. But sometimes we do wrong to people and they don't know that it's us. They may not even know that we've done wrong, like that anyone has done wrong, right? Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say a friend of yours says, hey, I'm applying for this job. Can you give me a reference? And when the person calls, you say, you know what? No, right? Like lazy person. You don't want to hire them. They don't know that you've done this. They don't know anything about it. Nobody's going to tell them that, right? So the second step, again, these are in order. And if you miss any one of them, it's like not doing anything. Imagine feeling bad about it and then having to let them know that you've done this, right? I think that's one of the hardest steps right there. Like, even if you sincerely regret, it's so hard to walk up to someone and let them know that you know what it is that you've done. especially if they don't know. Third, restitution, when possible. It's not always possible, but if it is, you absolutely have to do it. You have to fix what it is that you broke. That's your job. It's part of the requirements. Fourth, you have to ask for forgiveness from the person who has been wronged. You can do all the work on yourself that you want. You can try and pray to God. You can try and come back into alignment. If you do not directly approach and directly ask for forgiveness from the person that you've hurt, it's meaningless, right? So that's step 4. Step 5, you have to vow to this person to avoid the act in the future. Okay, I know what I did wrong. Here's what I did wrong. Like, this is pedagogy 101, right? Like when we teach kids to ask for forgiveness, right? It's not enough for them to say, I'm sorry. They have to say, what is it that you're sorry for? What did you do that you're sorry for? How are you going to avoid it next time? This is what this is. Vowing to avoid the act in the future. And 6, you have to actually avoid the act in the future, right? Not enough to say, I won't do it again, and then do it again in 5 minutes. Right? And Maimonides was asked, what do you do? What happens if you don't have the opportunity? Right? If I'm saying all of these things are required in order for teshuvah to happen, what happens if you don't have the opportunity again? Like, you can't finish your teshuvah. And Maimonides had 2 answers. The first one was, you will, because that's the way the world is, right? Like, that's the way your life is. Right? We repeat our patterns of behavior. And so maybe you won't look exactly the same as the previous time, but we are creatures of habit and we repeat our behavior. And so yes, you will have the opportunity. But the second answer was, if you don't, if it was something huge, right? That just, you will not have, the question he was asked specifically was, somebody cheated on their wife, and they promised to never do it again. They were like at number 5, but they were very old, right? So it was like 80 years old. I don't remember, 80, 85 years old. And so the person who was asking Maimonides said, well, I don't have the opportunity to do this anymore. And Maimonides said, then you have to live with it. You have to live with the fact that you can never complete. Like, that's the consequence of your actions. You have to face the consequences of your actions. Sometimes you can fix things, sometimes you can't, right? And so all of these, so do you see what I mean when I'm saying that, like, repentance is only number 1 here? It's only the first step. So repentance by itself is not enough, okay? As much of this as possible. Okay, oh, and okay, never mind. I don't know how long we're talking. So where am I next? No, I was like planning to have my like the timer, but it closed itself. See, even the timer wants me to speak with no end, right? So all right. So Yom Kippur, which is on our high holiday, Yom Kippur is the day of atonement of the Jewish people. It happens once a year. This year it's going to be like in mid-October. And the main theme of the day is repentance, is teshuvah. It's doing teshuvah. You're supposed to do a whole lot of like soul searching coming up to that day. That day, you focus both on the things that you've done to rupture your relationship with the divine and the world, but also what you've ruptured between yourself and other people. There are 2 categories of different problems. So the things that you've done to rupture your relationship with God and the world, that you can pray for forgiveness, but for things that you've ruptured with other people, you can't pray that away. You have to do the 6 steps that we were talking about. One of the prayers, one of the most important prayers, is called the Anatoly Sharon. It's a beautiful prayer. It sets a scene of God like a shepherd, and God like counting and passing all of the people of humanity one by one, like a little sheep or a little goat kid, and like having that give and take with each one. And then at the end, at the very, very end of this prayer, we end with this line. It says, "Ve'al kulam elo haslifot, slach lanu, mechal lanu, kaper lanu." What it means is this: for all of these sins, because we list them, right? Multitudes of sin, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, and grant us atonement. Remember when I said mechila? There it is. Yeah? Mechila. Mechila is the second one, it's the pardon. Slicha means forgiveness and kapara means atonement. And there's 3 different kinds of forgivenesses. That's the ones we pray for in Yom Kippur. Let's start with Mechila. So that's the next one. So you can think of a Mechila like a judicial pardon, right? Sometimes people are in jail and their lawyers or their loved ones ask the governors or the premiers to get a pardon. So the acknowledgement is still there. What they did wrong, they did wrong. By the very fact that you're asking for a pardon and you're not asking for another trial, you're acknowledging the guilt of the person, right? So what they've done, it's on the books. No one is forgiving that, but we're asking for a pardon. Why are we asking for a pardon? Because we relinquish our claim against the offender. This is the one that Maimonides is talking about. In psychological terms, my therapist tells me this is called detachment. You detach yourself from what it is that happened. You know, I've been giving sort of small examples. I can say that in one of my first full-time pulpit, I had a very abusive senior rabbi, okay? Never asked me for forgiveness, never, fixed any of it. But at some point, for my own sake, I need to practice detachment. And if that rabbi came to me and asked for forgiveness and showed true remorse and did all of the steps of teshuvah, it would be my obligation as a Jewish person to allow him to engage in teshuvah. And he can't engage in that unless I relinquish my claim, right? Now, does this mean that, the injustice is wiped? Not at all. Does it mean that somehow, the responsibility is no longer there? Not at all. Does it mean that I will create a relationship with this person? Absolutely not, right? But if he truly did those 6 steps, my Jewish obligation would be to allow him to undertake that route, to undertake that journey, because it's the privilege and responsibility of each of us to undertake those journeys. And I don't have the right to stand between this person and that journey, right? That's what Mechila is, okay? Not a reconciliation, okay? Not embracing a person. What you want to think of is the pothole. Pothole? That's what I already said. There we go, pothole, okay? This is my beautiful metaphor that I came up with 3 years ago. It's a pothole metaphor. You recognize there's a pothole in the road and you walk around it. And if you're really nice, you maybe put an orange pylon in there somewhere so that people know there's a pothole in the road, right? So you're not getting hurt by falling into the pothole again. And no one else is going to get hurt by falling into the pothole again, right? But there's no reconciliation. There's not, like I said, Mechila, even though it's one of a type of forgiveness, it's not really forgiveness at all. It's a pardon, right? It's saying, you do you, I'll do me. We have nothing to say to each other anymore. We have nothing to hold over you, and you have nothing to hold over me. That's Mechila. The second kind is Slicha, which is achieving an empathy for the troubledness of the offender. In other words, you get to a point, I'm told, you get to a point, even if people don't necessarily ask you for forgiveness, you get maybe to a point where you see the humanness of the person who did whatever they did to you, right? Maybe they had a terrible childhood. Maybe they did things because they were scared. It doesn't really matter. You notice them as a human, you mark them as a human, you say, I know where this came from, I know why this happened, and you give empathy to this person. But that's still not forgiveness, right? That is still not a full forgiveness. It's just saying it's one step above the pardon, it's one step above the detachment. This is an empathetic detachment, which is to say, I understand why this happened. I no longer hold this over you. You go, I'm fine. I'm not fine with what happened, but I'm fine with you moving on from this point. I will no longer hold this over you, right? no assumption that the relationship can be repaired. It can be, right? Like the slicha section, the slicha type of forgiveness is very, very wide. It's everything past the pardon, right? So it's the empathy detachment, or maybe you do want to repair the relationship. But the understanding has to be that this relationship will never be the same. It could be better, right? We know of stories of people who have had a big break with another person. And then, when they came back together, when that process of teshuvah took place, that relationship became stronger. It's possible, but it won't be the same. No matter what, it will not be the same. So this reminds me of rabbinic story. And since, I'm a rabbi, I have to tell you rabbinic stories. It's in my contract. If I don't tell you at least one story, I lose my rabbinic ordination. So, so there's a story about a father who had a son that was very ornery and contradictory and always didn't do what he was told to do and behaved very, very badly with everybody in the family. And so the father took the son to the pasture. This was agricultural, and he pounded this board on top of the fence of their property. And he gave his son a bucket of nails. And he said, every time that you do something that you acknowledge is something that you shouldn't have done, something that has hurt someone else, I want you to take one of those nails and I want you to pound them into the big board that I've got. So that went on for a few months, and the board became very, very busy with nails indeed. But slowly the son noticed that he felt bad enough, like he didn't want to go out, right? He didn't want to go out to put a nail in the board. And so he found himself changing his behavior. And at a certain point, he said to his dad, look, it's been a month and I haven't pounded any nails into this board. And the dad said, wonderful. So now we're going to reverse it. Every time you do something wonderful for another person, I want you to take out one of the nails. And that went on for a few months until very proudly the son came back to his father and he said, the board is clean. And so his father took him out to the pasture and he said, yes, it's clean. There are no more nails in the board. And that's wonderful. And I love the fact that you've got them here. But take a look at this board. This board will never be the same as the board that we started with, because there are holes all over this and splinters. And that's the reality, that you can change. You can say, I've done something wrong, and you can re-aim and you can do this full teshuvah cycle and you can be forgiven, but the board is never going to be the same, right? And that's what happens with forgiveness as well. You can fully forgive. It's called slicha shlema. Fully forgive another person. Acknowledge the path that they've traveled to become a better person, but that relationship is not going to be the same. It's just not, which is not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. What happened? Okay. This is a good time to take questions. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anecdotes? Or... No. Okay. Oh, yeah.
So there was one time right before Yom Kippur, and I'm in a situation where I've been betrayed by two very close people close to me. And it was the first time at Yom Kippur that I talked to my friend who's a rabbi who I was working with at the time, and I said, how do I forgive these people? Because I felt like if I forgave them, would it say that I was that I was saying that they did this okay? That's really what you're talking about. And one thing that my friend Rabbi said to me was that by taking this time at Yom Kippur to forgive, it doesn't mean what they do is okay.
No, not at all.
But it helps set you free from your anger and from your feelings of betrayal. Is that process of attachment?
Yeah, like that's the mechila part, right?
Yeah, that there's a way that it's not about them. That sometimes the forgiveness on Yom Kippur is about you and looking after your own mental health. And I didn't even have to you don't even have to talk to them specifically.
Yes.
That they had already asked for forgiveness. They will look for it. But for me at Yom Kippur, it was in my belly,
Yes.
And that idea of letting go of it is sort of like don't swallow poison to hurt someone else. It's like-
Oh, absolutely. But, and that's, I guess, my own traumas speaking, the word forgiveness doesn't fit for me over there.
Yeah.
Like that thing that you're describing, which is what I described as mechila, right? Like that is not forgiveness to me.
No.
That is just this detachment, is putting yourself, you know, saying that you will no longer allow this, whatever it is that it was, you will no longer allow it to have any power in your life, right? You've detached from it. It's very hard, especially when you're talking about betrayal and other kind of injustices, because we, and this is my own personal theology, is I believe that the part of us that thinks the world should be fair, that's the divine spark in us. And so when somebody betrays us, when somebody makes the world not fair, like when you have to deal with the consequences of somebody else's action that has really hurt your life and was an unfair thing for them to do, it's a betrayal of the divine spark in all of us, which is why I think it's so hard to get over it. You know, people say to me, you know, people are terrible. And I'm like, if you really believe that, then you wouldn't care if there was injustice, because you would be like, that's the way it is. That's what people are. But that's not the case. We are offended by injustices because most people are good people. And because this is what the divine spark means. It means to have a just world to live in. And so the word forgiveness doesn't fit for me there. That's why I use the word mechila for it.
Which is the acknowledgement that it's a process. And
Yes.
Different stages.
Different stages.
And then you can engage with the different stages as it's comfortable.
Yes.
for you. But it gave you, like you were saying, we break it down, it gave you a different perspective.
Yeah.
On what it meant. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
It is all these steps.
It's all these steps, yes. And just in general, I was going to say it at the end, but I can say it now. I am right now working with a book called Forgiveness is a Choice. Forget the name of the person who wrote it. It's called Forgiveness is a Choice, and it is a phenomenal book. That is he's not Jewish, I don't think, but like that's the way it's written. Enright, that's who it was, Roger Enright. And it's just the way it's set up is so, it's just amazing to me that you can get to it from a religious point of view, from a psychological point of view, from an emotional point of view, and it's all the same thing because that's the way we are built, right? Next point. Right, so I was talking a little bit about Slicha Shlema. It's a genuine and full forgiveness that leads to wholeness and a completely repaired relationship, whatever that relationship looks like, right? It could be that it leads to a divorce, right? An amicable divorce or whatever, like whatever. It might be that the repaired status of a relationship is not the same status as the relationship that you started out with, right? Next. Pothole, back to the pothole, right? So if mechila was, there's a pothole there, I'm going to avoid it and maybe put like a little flag on it so others don't fall. For slicha, for the forgiveness piece, is seeing the pothole and filling it up so the road is drivable again. But if you've ever done that, you know there is like, you can see where the pothole was, right? Like it's repaved, but you can see it. You can see where the fixing happened, right? Okay, next. Kapara. So that's the last form of forgiveness. And that one is a total wiping away of all hints of self-sinfulness. And as that might imply, this level of forgiveness can only come from God. This level of forgiveness can only come from God. The word kapara in Hebrew comes from the root of covering it up, right? So covering up as if it was never there. Next. Yeah, can only be granted by God. We cannot grant this. There is no way for human beings. You know, we hear people say forgive and forget, but that is never, ever a possibility. You can choose not to act on what you remember. You can choose not to worry at it, like not to sort of like, like when you've got like a tooth that hurts, like to worry it with your tongue. You can choose that, but it is not realistic nor possible for human beings to truly forget, to truly get back to a point where all of it was covered up. That's only from God, right? and that's my pothole. That's making it so there was never a pothole there in the first place. We can't do it. We're human. We can fix things. It's our job to fix the world and fix things in our relationships with each other. But we can't do the kapara. So what time is it? So it's 5 minutes, is that right? 7:40. 5 minutes. Good. Okay. So I wanted to offer a model of forgiveness from the Bible and with commentaries from the rabbis. The model of forgiveness in the Bible is the story of Joseph and his brothers, right? So quick refresher or quick story if you don't know the story of Joseph and his brothers. Joseph was one of the younger brothers in the house of Israel, of the children of Jacob, and he was a favorite of his father. So his father always treated him better than he treated everybody else in the family. And Joseph had these prophetic dreams where he saw that he would become a lord over his brothers. And of course, he told them that story. I'm not really sure still to this day what he was thinking, but he did tell his brothers and he kept lording it over them. And in the end, they got so mad at him and they hated him so much that they contemplated killing him. They threw him in a well, in a dry well, and then eventually they sold him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt. And many years later, after many trials and tribulations and a truly horrible life, like if you want to talk about like trauma-infused life, that would be Joseph. After all of those years, there was a famine in the land of Israel, and the brothers went down to Egypt to procure food and procure sustenance. He recognized them right away. They did not recognize him. They probably thought he was dead. And he didn't tell them that he is their brother. And he actually, in fact, set up a bunch of tests to see if they've changed at all. And so he made it look like one of them stole some stuff from him. And this is the brothers kind of like getting around and trying to figure out what's going on and trying to figure out how to move on so that they can take everybody home. So the brothers are saying, so they're all talking. Joseph is there, but they don't know that he can hear them and understand them. They say to each other, we are being punished on account of our brother. We saw his distress when he pleaded with us, but we did not listen. On that account, this disaster came upon us. Right? And Reuben said, did I not say to you, do not sin against the child, but you did not listen, and so his blood is being required of us. Right? So it's a pretty tough passage to begin with. And then you get the rabbinic commentary on it. And the rabbinic commentary, Genesis Rabbah, is one of the commentary compendiums on the Torah and on our Bible. And the rabbis, this is anonymous, doesn't like tell you which rabbi is teaching this, but one of them said, is it possible that Joseph, who was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery, saw his brothers selling him into slavery yet remained silent? Indeed not, for he threw himself at the feet of each one of them, imploring them to take pity on him, but not one of them did. Later, recollecting Joseph's pleas, the brothers are quoted as saying, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he besought us, right? So not only was it already, I mean, even on its own, the story is pretty harsh, but like the rabbis make the trauma even more pronounced and even more forefront. They bring it to the forefront, right? Like when you say in one verse in the Torah that they sold him into slavery, there are a lot of actions there, right? They had to bring him up out of the well. They had to bind him so that they could sell him. And all of this time, he was crying and he was begging and he was pleading and they didn't care, right? And so they're thinking this is retribution, like God's retribution, not because they don't know it's Joseph, right? So they think this is divine retribution for that. Go ahead to the next. So what we just read before in 42, in Genesis 42, was the story of like, so Joseph he planted evidence in Benjamin's sack. He put like a very valuable thing in Benjamin's sack and made it look like Benjamin was the thief. In 45, so this is 3 chapters later, Joseph is now revealing himself to his brothers. So what happened in these 3 chapters, right? Well, what happened was that he wanted to see if they've engaged in the cycle of teshuvah. And what he found was that they did. Because what happened was that even though he planted evidence on Benjamin, Judah took responsibility and said, keep me here in prison, but let my little brother go. Because this little brother, our father loves him so much and he will die. If the little child is not returned home, he will die. And this is exactly now, remember we were talking about teshuvah. They have to be repentful and all of that. They have to vow never to do it again. And when the opportunity arises, they have to actually live up to their promise. And this is what you've got here. Judah, who was the one that sold, that came up with a plan of selling Joseph into slavery, that Judah is taking on the responsibility of saving his little brother, even though he knows that his father loves that little brother more than he loves him. So that's like a true cycle of teshuvah. It's completely circular and got back to the beginning. And because of that, because Joseph saw that this teshuvah process was taking place and has actually taken place, he then can hide himself no longer. And he says to his brothers, come close to me, for I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. And now do not be pained or let upset that you sold me here, for it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. So Joseph, on his own work, his own psychological work, has reframed his experience, right? He's reframed his experience from trauma to this is what needed to happen in order for me to be in a place where I can help my family, right? So he did his own therapy. The brothers did their own therapy. If you haven't read the Judah cycle, I highly recommend it because Judah goes through a lot before he learns his lesson. And it's like one of my favorite narratives in the Torah is the narrative of Judah learning from his daughter-in-law, from Tamar specifically. So it's an interesting story, but he clearly learned his lesson and he brings that lesson into being, and that causes a repair in their relationship. I have other stuff, but I think that's okay. Yeah. So. Any questions? Comments?
Sarah, did any questions come in on the Zoom?
Is there anything in the chat?
No.
Okay. Okay, yes.
I don't understand why a lot of people hate Jews or are against Jews. In my experience, I find a lot of these people don't even know one Jewish person. It doesn't really make sense to me.
I can't say that I disagree with that statement. I don't know what to tell you. It's part of my people's history and part of my people's present. It's just the way it is. That doesn't mean that we don't fight against it, but you know, I don't know. Why do people hate other people? Like, it's not even just about us, right? Like, people hate other groups of people that they don't belong to. Like, why is that?
Well, just ignorance and never like having a friend who was whatever nationality or religion or.
Then you've answered your own questions.
Really.
Yeah, then you've answered your own question. But that's not, I mean, that's a big issue. It's just not one that I think we want to focus on today. Like, I feel in general, like there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the world. There's a lot to be done about it, but I also think it is not in our benefit to focus only on that. And so therefore I don't teach about, I mean, unless I'm specifically asked to teach about anti-Semitism, I bring other things to the table. It's the same thing that, like, when I was first in rabbinical school, which was we didn't have women rabbis for so long in the conservative. I was ordained in the conservative movement, and I would be asked like, why aren't you teaching about women's issues? And I was like, because I want to teach about Jewish issues, right? I just don't think it's to our benefit, to like our own internal benefit, let alone in the world, to like focus so much on the things that are hateful to us. Like we have so much more to bring to the table, and that's what I try to do. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for your presentation and for sharing your wisdom with us. I think forgiveness is a topic that we can all relate to in our own lives. So now we will finish our celebration with another performance from Corin and Warren of Way to the World.
And Warren made it. Walk amongst yourselves. It's all about forgiveness.
No, oh, sorry. There's lots of treats, everyone, if anyone would like to have any more.
Would you want to sit down?
I don't know scraps.
Just while Lauren is setting up, I just want to answer part of the question. Joni, Corin, myself, we belong to a group called Durham Multi-Faith, Boston. Community, that's it, Durham. And over the years, we've been working as a group, Hindus, Islam, Muslim, Jews, Christian faiths, different charitable things. We have a prayer for peace service coming up at Westminster United Church on June 11th. The one thing I've learned about doing that is I learned so much about these other people in the group, their faiths and themselves, that I never knew. So one of the things I think that's important is for people to get out like tonight and find out about other people and start questioning, okay, what are these people like? And instead of just sort of hearing from, the internet or something like that, right? Yeah, so I think that was an excellent question.
Oh, yeah. With the change in weather, guitars don't like it. Okay, so Warren and I have 3 songs to share with you. The first one is called Tumba Lalaika. It's a very traditional Yiddish song. We're going to sing the chorus in Yiddish and the verse in English. It's a type of riddle song. There's a riddle in the story of the song, which is why we have it in English. So you can hear the riddle. And it's been recorded by lots of folk singers over the years, and in English and in Yiddish. Tumba la
Hear my tale of a certain young man, stayed up all night till he thought of the plan.
He wanted a girl who would be his delight, a girl who was pretty, witty, and bright.
Tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, laika, shtirbala, laika, tumbala, laika, frela, so sein. Tell me, my pretty one, tell if you know what needs no rain and yet it can grow.
Tell what can blossom, bloom through the years. Tell what can yearn, cry without tears.
Tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, laika, shtirbala, laika, tumbala, laika, frela, so sein. Oh, foolish boy, now surely you know, a stone needs no rain, and yet it can grow.
Love can blossom through the years, and a heart when it yearns cries without tears.
Tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, 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 laika, tumbala, laika, shtirbala, laika, tumbala, laika, frela, so sein.
Okay, so our next song, we're going to slow it down a little bit. Another traditional, it's from Psalms, and it's called Erev Shel Shoshanim, Evening of Lilies. This song is often sung at weddings because it's a very beautiful song.
Okay to do. Aren't they both?